What if the happiest day of your life turned into your worst nightmare? What if the vows, the laughter, the dance under soft golden lights, the promises whispered between two hearts, all of it, was just the surface of something you were never meant to see? Emily Carter was radiant in white, a vision of love and joy, standing beside her new husband, Daniel Westwood. Their wedding was everything they had dreamed of: warm embraces, glasses raised in celebration, the air thick with the scent of roses and champagne. Guests toasted to their future, their families joined in what should have been a lifetime bond. Smiles stretched across every face. But not every smile meant happiness. Not every handshake was sincere. Not every guest wished them well. Because while Daniel stood at the altar, pledging his life to Emily, he had no idea that somewhere in the shadows of that very celebration, the past was waiting for him. That a secret, buried so deep, so carefully guarded, was only moments from shattering his world. He had married the love of his life. But the life he thought they would build together was never meant to exist. It started with something small. A glance that lasted too long. A whisper that stopped just as he entered the room. The way Emily's mother gripped her wrist just a little too tightly when she thought no one was looking. Then, hours later, after the last guest had left, after the music had faded into the quiet hum of the night, Daniel found something. Something that made his blood run cold. Something that told him the woman he just married, the woman who had just promised forever, was keeping something from him. And then she was gone. No note. No trace. No explanation. One moment she was there, wrapped in his arms, and the next, nothing. Just an empty bed, a wedding dress abandoned on the floor, the soft flicker of a candle in the dark. What happened to Emily Carter? Why did she vanish just hours after saying, "I do"? And what exactly did Daniel uncover that night? Something so terrifying that it made his bride disappear without a trace. Stay with us as we uncover the shocking mystery of Emily Carter, the bride who vanished on her wedding night after her husband discovered a dark family secret. If you love true crime stories that leave you questioning everything, subscribe and turn on notifications. Emily was only 26 when she disappeared, leaving behind a celebration that turned into a nightmare. Her wedding to Daniel in Charleston, South Carolina, was meant to be a joyful beginning, a promise of love and hope. Instead, it became a mystery that has haunted everyone involved. What should have been a night of joy quickly turned into a puzzle of unanswered questions. Guests had arrived with smiles and laughter, but underneath the surface, there were hints of secrets no one could have imagined. Emily was known for her gentle nature and warm smile, a young woman whose bright future seemed certain. Daniel, her devoted husband, had looked forward to a lifetime together, believing he had found a partner who would share his dreams. But on that fateful night, as the celebration faded into darkness, things took a shocking turn. In the hours after the ceremony, when the last echoes of the festivities died away, something unexpected happened. A discovery made by Daniel shattered the illusion of a perfect wedding night, revealing a truth that had been hidden for years. In a quiet moment when the noise of the party was gone, Daniel stumbled upon clues that hinted at a past filled with secrets. His discovery was not just about a personal betrayal, it was about a long and troubled history that reached deep into the family. A hidden legacy of unanswered questions and unexplained events began to emerge, linking Emily to a past that she had never shared with anyone. This was a case where love and commitment were interwoven with deception and hidden truths. The night was meant to mark the start of a new chapter, but instead, it raised suspicions and left Daniel grappling with fear and confusion. It became clear that the life he thought he knew was built on a foundation of secrets. As the realization set in that Emily was not who he believed her to be, the weight of the past came crashing down. The mystery grew larger than anyone could have expected, leaving friends and family in shock and a community desperate for answers. What made this case even more unique was the way it connected personal tragedy with a long-forgotten family history. Unlike other disappearances, this was not just a random act or an isolated incident. It was a story woven into the fabric of a family legacy that had been hidden away, one that could explain so much about the choices and actions of those involved. The unanswered questions and the trail of clues pointed to a history that might have cost Emily her life, a history that had been kept under lock and key for far too long. Now, the search for truth has become a desperate quest to understand how a night meant for celebration turned into a heartbreaking mystery. With every new piece of evidence and every unanswered question, the story of Emily's disappearance grows more complex. It is a tale of love turned to betrayal, of hidden secrets that refuse to stay buried, and of a family with a past that continues to cast a long shadow over the present. Stay with us as we unravel the layers of this mystery, a story that has captivated a community and continues to raise more questions than answers. If you are drawn to stories where every clue leads to more mystery and every revelation changes everything, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for the latest updates on this case. Emily Carter was the kind of woman people noticed, not just for her beauty, but for the quiet grace she carried with her. At 26, she had the world at her feet, raised in wealth and privilege, yet never the type to boast about it. To outsiders, she seemed warm, kind, and deeply in love with Daniel Westwood, the man she had just married. But beneath that soft exterior, there was something unspoken, something that lingered in the spaces between words, in the glances that lasted too long. Emily had secrets, ones she never shared, not even with the man she vowed to spend her life with. Daniel Westwood had built his life brick by brick. At 29, he was already a successful architect, respected in his field, admired by his peers. He had always been drawn to Emily's quiet charm, the way she carried herself with an air of mystery. He thought he knew her. He thought their love was built on trust. But on the night of their wedding, that illusion shattered. Hours before Emily disappeared, Daniel uncovered something about her family, something that made his stomach drop. The details were unclear at first, but the feeling was undeniable. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was something dangerous. He didn't realize it then, but the moment he pulled back the curtain on Emily's past, he was already too deep. And by the time he turned around to face her, she was gone. Margaret Carter was not a woman who forgave easily. Sharp, calculating, and fiercely protective of her family, she was the kind of mother who controlled everything in her orbit. To those outside, she was poised and sophisticated, a woman of class and wealth. But those who knew her best understood that Margaret Carter did not make mistakes. And she did not let secrets escape. At the wedding, she played the role of the gracious hostess, the proud mother. But anyone paying attention could see the cracks beneath the surface. The tight grip on Emily's arm. The whispered conversations cut short. The way she watched Daniel, like a hawk circling overhead, waiting for the moment to strike. In the hours after Emily's disappearance, Margaret's behavior raised questions. Questions she never seemed willing to answer. Detective Mark Holloway had seen plenty of cases in his time, but something about this one didn't sit right. At first, it seemed like a simple missing persons case, a bride who got cold feet, a husband left in shock. But as he dug deeper, the details didn't add up. The lack of evidence. The strange responses from the Carter family. The feeling that everyone involved was walking a careful line, saying just enough but never too much. Holloway had worked homicide for years, and experience told him that when a person vanished like this, there was usually a reason. And in this case, the reason wasn't love gone wrong. It was something much, much darker. William Carter was a name barely spoken in the Carter household. He had been Emily's father, but his presence had always been more of a shadow than a figure. He died years ago, under circumstances that never quite made sense. His death was ruled an accident, but those who knew the family whispered otherwise. There were too many loose ends, too many unanswered questions. And now, with Emily's disappearance, his name was surfacing again. There were old records, hidden documents, things people had tried to forget. And somewhere in those details was the answer to why Emily vanished. Lisa Monroe had been Emily's closest friend for years. They had been inseparable once, sharing dreams, secrets, and everything in between. As bridesmaid, Lisa had stood by Emily's side on her wedding day, smiling for pictures, laughing over champagne. But in the quiet moments, when no one else was looking, Lisa had seen something in Emily's eyes that unsettled her. Fear. A hesitation that wasn't just wedding day jitters. Hours before Emily disappeared, Lisa had spoken to her. And now, she was the last known person to have seen her alive. She kept replaying that final conversation, wondering if she had missed something, if there had been a hidden meaning behind Emily's words. The problem was, she wasn't the only one asking questions. And as the investigation moved forward, Lisa began to wonder if knowing the truth was more dangerous than not knowing at all. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered. A missing bride. A husband left in the dark. A mother with too much to hide. A detective who wouldn't let go. A past filled with unanswered questions. The deeper the investigation went, the more it became clear, Emily's disappearance wasn't an accident. It wasn't random. It was part of something bigger. Something hidden beneath years of deception. And somewhere out there, buried under all the lies, was the truth. The only question left was whether anyone would survive finding it. The night should have ended with the quiet rustling of silk sheets, whispered promises, and the warmth of new beginnings. Instead, it ended in confusion, fear, and the first unsettling traces of a mystery that would haunt Daniel Westwood for the rest of his life. The last guests had left, the music had faded, and the Grand Carter estate was silent once more, resting under the glow of the moon. The air was thick with the scent of candle wax and wine, the remnants of a celebration that had been nothing short of perfect, or so it seemed. Daniel had never been a man who ignored his instincts. And on that night, as he stood in the dimly lit halls of the Carter mansion, something gnawed at him. An unease he couldn't name. Emily had been distant ever since they retreated from the reception, her smile forced, her laughter too light, as if masking something. He had tried to brush it off, to tell himself it was just the exhaustion of the day. But then she had excused herself, saying she needed a moment alone, disappearing into the upstairs corridors of the estate. And Daniel was left standing in the dining hall, feeling like a stranger in his wife's home. He wandered through the grand house, searching for a bottle of wine to cap off the evening. That was when he saw it, an old wooden door at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar, the paint around the handle worn from years of use. He had never noticed it before. Something about it felt out of place, standing there in the darkness. Curiosity won over, and he stepped forward, pushing the door open just enough to slip inside. The study was unlike any other room in the house. Dark, untouched, almost forgotten. Dust clung to the shelves, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and faded ink. The room felt frozen in time, as though its owner had simply walked away one day and never returned. The dim glow of the desk lamp barely illuminated the massive oak desk in the center of the room, the cluttered stacks of yellow documents, the leather-bound journal resting on top, its edges frayed from time. Daniel reached for it, flipping through the pages, the ink smudged in places, as though written in haste. At first, the words made little sense, fragments of thoughts, dates, names. But then, as he turned the pages, the realization settled in, a slow, creeping horror that made his stomach drop. The journal belonged to William Carter, Emily's late father. And within its pages were confessions, ones that painted a picture of a man Daniel had never met but now understood in a way that chilled him to the bone. William Carter had been involved in something dark, something that had been buried beneath the polished veneer of the Carter name. It started with the mention of young women, some who had worked for the family, others who had simply passed through the estate. And then, the names, each one followed by a date. Some with brief descriptions, others only marked with a single word, gone. The last entry was the most alarming. The ink was heavier, as if the writer's hand had been shaking. The words barely legible. She knows. I see it in her eyes. It won't be long now. They will come for her. If she stays, she will be next. Daniel felt a sharp chill crawl up his spine. The entry was dated years ago, just before William Carter's supposed accident. And suddenly, it made sense why Emily had always avoided talking about her father. Why there were no old photos of him displayed in the house. Why her mother's name carried more weight than her father's ever did. Heart pounding, Daniel snapped the journal shut and turned, intent on finding Emily. But before he could take a step, the floor creaked behind him. Emily stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with something between fear and sorrow. She had seen the journal in his hands, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "You shouldn't have found that." Her hands trembled at her sides. "They'll never let us go now." The words hit Daniel like a blow. "Who?" he asked, stepping closer. But Emily shook her head, backing away. "I thought I could keep you safe," she whispered. "I thought," her voice cracked. "I have to fix this." Before he could stop her, she turned and ran. Up the grand staircase, disappearing into the darkened corridors. Daniel followed, calling her name, but by the time he reached their room, she was gone. At first, he thought she had locked herself inside, that she needed space to process whatever she had meant. But when an hour passed and she still didn't return, the knot in his stomach tightened. By 12:15 a.m., panic set in. He searched every room, every hallway, calling her name, his voice echoing through the empty mansion. He checked the gardens, the long corridors, even the library where she used to sit for hours reading. Nothing. Then, outside, near the sprawling backyard, something caught his eye. A piece of white fabric, barely visible under the soft glow of the garden lights. His pulse hammered as he stepped closer, and his breath caught in his throat. It was Emily's wedding dress. Abandoned, soaked in mud, torn at the hem as if she had run through the wet grass. And then, just beyond the tree line, something else. A single red ribbon, the same one Emily had worn in her hair that night. It was tied to the branch of a tree, fluttering slightly in the cool night breeze. Daniel's mind raced. It didn't make sense. If Emily had run away, why would she leave her dress? Why the ribbon? He scanned the tree line, but beyond the soft rustling of the leaves, there was nothing but darkness. The silence was suffocating. The night, too still. Somewhere out there, his wife had vanished. And the only clue she had left behind was the ribbon tied to the tree. Daniel Westwood could barely feel his hands as he gripped his phone, his fingers slick with sweat as he dialed 911. His breath was shallow, his chest rising and falling with panicked gasps. The words felt foreign as he forced them out to the dispatcher. "My wife, she's missing. She was here, and now she's gone." He kept repeating himself, as if saying it over and over would somehow make it less real. The dispatcher's voice was calm, methodical, asking for details he could barely process. "When was the last time you saw her? Did you see anyone else on the property? Is there any sign of a struggle?" Struggle. The word hit him like a hammer. He hadn't even considered it. He had been so sure Emily had run, but now, staring at the abandoned wedding dress in the dirt, the ribbon tied to the tree, something in his gut told him this wasn't as simple as Emily leaving on her own. Within an hour, blue and red lights flooded the Carter estate, bouncing off the windows, turning the quiet halls into something out of a crime scene. Officers moved through the property, their voices clipped, radios crackling. Detective Mark Holloway arrived, stepping out of his unmarked car with the slow, deliberate steps of a man who had seen enough cases to know when something wasn't right. Daniel was questioned immediately. The first suspect is always the spouse. He knew this. He had watched enough true crime documentaries to know that in most cases, it was the husband. But this wasn't one of those cases. He knew it. "When did you last see your wife?" Daniel couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had expected worry, fear, anything that showed Margaret Carter cared about her daughter's disappearance. Instead, she was dismissive. Almost rehearsed. Emily's younger brother, Nathan Carter, stood just behind their mother, his face unreadable. He hadn't said a word since arriving, hadn't even looked at Daniel. But there was something off about him. His hands were in his pockets, his jaw clenched tight. "Nathan, when was the last time you spoke to your sister?" Holloway asked. Nathan didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his voice was flat. "At the reception. She seemed fine." Daniel clenched his fists. Fine. He had seen the way Emily had been acting, the way her hands had trembled when she saw the journal. If her own brother couldn't see that something was wrong, then either he didn't know Emily at all, or he was hiding something. Hours passed. Officers searched the estate, looking for anything that could point to where Emily had gone. And then, just as the sun started to rise, they found something. Blood. Small, barely noticeable at first, just a few drops near the backyard, close to where the wedding dress had been found. But then, another stain further back, leading toward the dense tree line. A sample was taken, rushed to the lab for testing. When the results came back, there was no denying the truth. The blood belonged to Emily Carter. Daniel felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. Blood meant injury. Blood meant struggle. Blood meant Emily hadn't just run away. And then came the next discovery. An underground bunker, hidden beneath the old tool shed on the far end of the property. The entrance was concealed beneath rusted metal, so old that it almost blended into the ground. When officers forced it open, the air that spilled out was stale, thick with dust and decay. Inside, the bunker was small, barely large enough for more than a few people. Old wooden crates lined the walls, filled with what looked like documents, faded photographs, and, most disturbingly, wedding dresses. Not one. Not two. But at least half a dozen. Each old, yellowed with age, each eerily similar in style. None of them belonged to Emily. "What the hell is this?" one of the officers muttered, pulling out one of the dresses. The lace was frayed, the fabric brittle. Holloway's expression was unreadable as he turned to Margaret Carter. "Care to explain this?" For the first time, Margaret hesitated. Her lips pressed together, her posture stiffening just slightly. "It's nothing," she said finally. "This house has been in our family for generations. There are bound to be things left behind." Holloway didn't look convinced. Neither did Daniel. And then, another revelation. A security camera at the front gates of the estate had captured footage from the night before. The grainy black and white video showed a car pulling away from the mansion at exactly 12:30 a.m. It wasn't one of the guests. It wasn't one of the family's vehicles. The license plate was unreadable, the car unmarked. Emily had disappeared sometime between 11 p.m. and 12:15 a.m. And at 12:30 a.m., an unmarked car had left the estate. Someone had taken her. But the question remained, was it someone from outside? Or was it someone in the Carter family, covering their tracks? As Daniel stood in the morning light, staring at the bunker, the bloodstains, the discarded wedding dresses, one thing became painfully clear. Emily hadn't just vanished. She had been erased. The Carter family was no stranger to secrets, but this time, the walls of their legacy were closing in. Investigators tore through every inch of the estate, peeling back layers of deception built over decades. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became, Emily's disappearance wasn't an isolated event. It was a pattern, a sickening thread that wove itself through the Carter lineage, linking them to women who had vanished without a trace. Daniel sat in the interrogation room for hours, replaying every moment, every conversation. He could still hear Emily's voice, "You shouldn't have found that, they'll never let us go now." He hadn't understood then. But now. Now he knew. William Carter, Emily's late father, had been a man of influence, wealth, and a darkness that lingered long after his death. His business empire, the Carter Group, had been untouchable for years. But buried beneath the polished reputation was something else. Something monstrous. It started with names. The journal Daniel had found in the locked study became the first real crack in the Carter family's carefully constructed image. Investigators pored over the pages, connecting dots that had been ignored for decades. Women. Always women. Young, ambitious, some from small towns, others from cities where they wouldn't be missed. All of them had one thing in common: they had been involved with William Carter or one of his closest associates. Some had been secretaries. Some had been assistants. Some had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But none of them had been seen again. And now, Emily had been added to that list. The blood found near the backyard. The bunker filled with wedding dresses. The security footage of the unmarked car leaving the estate in the dead of night. The evidence painted a horrifying picture, but it wasn't enough. Holloway knew what had happened. Daniel knew what had happened. The whole town whispered about it behind closed doors. But knowing wasn't the same as proving. Margaret Carter was arrested first. Her composure never broke, not even as they led her out of the grand estate in handcuffs, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions she refused to answer. Daniel watched from the crowd, hoping, praying, that she would finally crack. That she would finally tell them where Emily was. But Margaret Carter was nothing if not loyal to the Carter name. She never spoke a word. She denied everything, called it all a witch hunt against her family, claimed the evidence was circumstantial. And in the end, she was right. The blood found on the property wasn't enough to convict. There was no body. No eyewitnesses. No direct proof tying Margaret, or anyone in the Carter family, to Emily's disappearance. And so, after months of trials, appeals, and endless media frenzy, she walked free. Daniel lost everything in the process. He was no longer the grieving husband. He was a suspect, a man people whispered about in grocery stores and stared at when he walked past. He was the husband of the woman who vanished. The man who must have known something. The man who must have seen the signs. But he hadn't. He had been blind to it all. And now Emily was gone. The estate was eventually sold. The bunker was sealed. The Carter family name faded from public attention, but the rumors never did. And Emily? Emily was never found. Despite search teams, private investigators, and desperate late-night drives down every abandoned road Daniel could find, there was no trace of her. No ransom note. No final message. Just silence. Years passed, but the case remained open. Daniel kept her wedding ring on his nightstand, the last tangible piece of the life they were supposed to have. He read the journal over and over, memorizing the names, hoping that somewhere in those pages, there was an answer. But the truth was simple. Emily's fate had been decided long before she ever said, "I do." The case of Emily Carter is one that refuses to rest, a mystery tangled in wealth, power, and the kind of secrets that never see the light of day. Even now, years later, the questions remain. What really happened that night in the Carter estate? Did Emily simply run, disappearing into the shadows to escape a truth too horrifying to face? Or was she silenced? Swallowed up by the very legacy she was born into? Her family's silence has always been the loudest part of this case. From the moment Daniel sounded the alarm, they refused to cooperate, refused to answer the simplest of questions. Margaret Carter's cold, unwavering stance, her refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing, raises a terrifying thought: was Emily's disappearance planned? Was it an inevitability rather than an accident? And then there's the evidence. The blood in the backyard. The hidden bunker filled with rotting wedding dresses, none of them hers. The unmarked black car caught on security footage. Clues that led nowhere. Clues that hinted at something far older and far deeper than one missing woman. How many others had walked into the Carter family's grasp, never to be seen again? Was Emily just another chapter in a long history of disappearances that no one ever dared to question? And if she had uncovered something that night, something worse than the journal, something buried even deeper, who was really behind it? Had Margaret orchestrated her own daughter's disappearance? Had there been someone else, someone more powerful, someone even Margaret feared? Perhaps the most haunting question of all, could Emily still be alive? It's the possibility that lingers in the minds of those who still follow the case. That maybe, just maybe, she escaped. That she is out there somewhere, watching, hiding, waiting. That one day, she might come back. But if she did, what would she reveal? And would she even be safe? The answers remain buried, locked away in the history of a family that has spent generations keeping the truth hidden. No matter how much time passes, the questions never fade. What do you think happened to Emily Carter? Let us know your theories in the comments below. The mystery of Emily Carter's disappearance remains one of the most chilling and unresolved cases in recent history. Despite investigations, endless theories, and the haunting evidence left behind, the truth continues to slip through the cracks. Was she taken by someone close to her? Did she escape something worse? Or did she suffer the same fate as the other women linked to her family's dark past? Every clue raises more questions than answers. Every dead end leads back to the Carter estate, a place that holds secrets no one dares to uncover. And somewhere, buried beneath the weight of silence, the truth remains, waiting. But Emily's case is not the only one that defies explanation. Next time, we uncover another disturbing case of a woman who vanished under terrifying circumstances, leaving behind only a chilling final message. If you enjoy true crime stories that leave you questioning everything, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know your theories in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.